Hi everyone. Hi everyone, and thank you for joining Women's-led Organizations and Yayasan Saim Dabi's event, Sexual Harassment, Our Obligations, in conjunction with International Women's Day 2022. My name is Kiran, and I'll be your MC and host for this event. Before the event starts, we'll be opening with a short prayer or dua recital presented by Encik Rusdi from Yayasan Saim Dabi. Okay.
Okay. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahirabbil alamin wassalatu wassalamu ala asyrafil anbiya'i wal mursalin wa ala alihi washabihi ajmain. Segala puji hanya untuk-Mu ya Allah dan selawat dan salam ke atas junjungan besar Nabi Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Ya Allah, kami merapatkan kesyukuran di atas keizinan-Mu untuk kami berkumpul pada hari ini, menadah tangan dengan penuh pengharapan dan rendah hati agar kami digunakan kekuatan, tekad dan azam yang tinggi untuk berjaya serta dapat menjalankan tugas dengan penuh amanah dan bertanggungjawab. Ya Allah, Ya Rahman, Ya Rahim, Engkau mantapkanlah semangat dan hasil kerja kami pada hari ini untuk terus berkongsi ilmu dan memberi kesedaran kepada umum, terutamanya bahaya gejala gangguan seksual di tempat kerja. Mudah-mudahan segala usaha yang kami lakukan pada hari ini mendapat keredaan-Mu dan memberi impak yang positif demi melahirkan generasi yang cemerlang dan berakhlak mulia. Ya Allah, Ya Kafi, kami memohon kepadamu agar dipelihara diri kami dan negara kami daripada segala wabak penyakit dan bencana alam. Berikanlah kesembuhan dan kuatkanlah semangat kami untuk menghadapi ujian-Mu, Ya Allah. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. La yazuru ma'asmi syai'un fil ardi wa la fis sama' wa huwas sami'un alim. Rabbana atina fid dunya hasanah wa fil akhirati hasanah wa qina azabannar. Walhamdulillahirabbil alamin. Thank you.
Thank you, Encik Rusdi, for the doa recital. Next, I would like to bring everyone's attention to the chat box where my colleague Rusni has typed out some housekeeping rules to keep in mind during the event so that we can ensure the event goes smoothly. Here you'll find information on the virtual background you can use and the rules for audios, videos, and questions and answers you may have. Please do go over what my colleague Rusni has sent in the chat box. I would also like to welcome Yang Amat Mulia, Tuanku Tan Sri Imran Ibni Almarhum Tuanku Jafar, Chairman of Yayasan Saim Dabi, to deliver his welcoming address that has been recorded for the event.
Assalamu alaikum and a very good day, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at Yayasan Saim Dabi's International Women's Day 2022 celebration in collaboration with our long-term partner, Women's Aid Organization, or WAO. I would like to thank all the corporate leaders, policymakers, distinguished speakers, and of course all our guests for joining us at this important roundtable discussion. Every year, on the 8th of March, the world celebrates the achievements and the potential of all women wherever they are. This month, YSD is recognizing the contribution of women in Malaysia who are championing climate action, advocating gender equality, spearheading world-class research and life-saving initiatives, especially among B40 women, towards a sustainable tomorrow. We also recognize the potential of women and girls as we focus on the development of women and girls in sports under our sports pillar, as well as on exposing more girls to science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, or STEM, under our annual flagship program, the Saim Dabi Young Innovators Challenge. Today's roundtable discussion entitled Sexual Harassment, Our Obligations, aims to raise awareness on the roles of companies and good industry practices in preventing and addressing sexual harassment, as well as other gender issues. All of us can make a difference by stepping up our actions now to ensure a safe, inclusive, and productive working environment. It is hoped that this important event will be a catalyst for the impending Anti-Sexual Harassment Bill 2021 yet to be enacted. Ladies and gentlemen, YSD, as a philanthropic arm of Sime Darby Berhad, Sime Darby Plantation Berhad, and Sime Darby Property Berhad, focuses on our 5 pillars: education, environment, community and health, sports, and arts and culture. This year is our 40th anniversary, a milestone we are extremely proud of. The Foundation has been actively supporting causes that empower women from all walks of life to accelerate gender parity in various areas. YSD is proud of the achievements of women leaders who have been working closely with us across our 5 pillars. And I would like to share with you a few examples of these extraordinary women. Professor Dr. Adiba Khairul Zaman, who is the first Asian female president of the International AIDS Society, and former YSD scholar, Professor Datin Paduka Dr. Teo Su Huang, who is also the Chief Scientific Officer from Cancer Research Malaysia, are amongst world-renowned female leaders who have not only accomplished scientific breakthroughs in their respective fields, but also made significant contributions in the lives of the underprivileged. Dr. Wong Ipin and Dr. Felicity Oram are currently leading wildlife conservation efforts using world-class science and extensive community engagement so that humans and wildlife, and in their case, elephants and orangutans respectively, may coexist in harmony for us to save these precious species from extinction. Meanwhile, Ms. Suzanne Mooney and Ms. Lian Wee both have successfully founded organizations that incorporate climate actions into their operational practices to reduce the carbon footprint to fight climate change, while minimizing food electronics waste and assisting underprivileged communities. Ms. Alia Yung Hanifa, Malaysian water skier and YSD ambassador, is currently ranked 5th in the world and is making her way to be the world #1 and make Malaysia even more proud of her. The First Lady of Malaysian Theatre, Datuk Farida American, and Kaki Seni founding president, Ms. Lau Ngai Wen, are doing so much and actively empowering women and girls in the arts industry. Ladies and gentlemen, for more than a decade, YSD has worked with the Women's Aid Organization, or WAO, led by another powerhouse, WAO's Executive Director, Ms. Sumitra Visvanathan. We have been working towards the protection and advocacy of efforts of women survivors of domestic violence and their children. YSD is proud that our support has enabled WAO to reform various national policies and develop guidelines on setting up and operating domestic violence shelters in the country. Previously, together with YSD, WAO worked closely with Sime Darby Plantation to equip 300 staff with knowledge and skills on responding to gender-based issues. The partnership also resulted in the development of a toolkit on responding to sexual harassment and child abuse, as well as under the rights of abuse victims under various Malaysian laws. We look forward to the government endorsing the gender equality agenda and the anti-stalking law, as well as enacting laws to eliminate gender discrimination in the workplace. Ladies and gentlemen, on this special occasion, I would like to extend our appreciation to all the amazing women out there for your hard work, perseverance, and achievements. Let's all work together to break the bias and to make an impactful change towards a better future. Thank you.
Thank you, Yang Amat Mulia Tunku Tan Sri Imran, for your welcoming address. Next, I would like to welcome Sumitra Viswanathan, Executive Director of Women's Aid Organization and the moderator for today's event, to deliver her introductory remarks. With that, I'll pass the floor over to you, Sumitra.
Perhaps while we wait for that video to be shown, it was a pre-recorded message. So I'm just, wondering whether, Kieran, if I can take a little bit of time to say thank you so much to that wonderful, kind message from Yang Amat Mulia Tunku Tan Sri Imran. We're so grateful for the partnership that we have with Yayasan Saim Dabi, and also the recognition from our partners like Yayasan Saim Dabi, that together we can do so much impact, we can achieve so much change, all of the change that we need to see. So thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sumitra Viswanathan, and I'm the Executive Director of Women's Aid Organization. I'd like to welcome you all to this very important conversation on our obligations with prevention and response to sexual harassment. Before that, I would like to say thank you so much to Yang Amat Mulia Tunku Tan Sri Imran, Ibni Almarhum Tunku Jaafar, who is the chairman of Yayasan Saim Dabi, the co-sponsor of this event, and Dr. Haja Yatela Zainal Abidin, who is CEO of Yayasan Saim Dabi. I also would like to acknowledge and say hello to our amazing speakers, Michelle Aikin, Chief People Officer of Saim Dabi Property Berhad, Rashid Reza, who is Head of Group Sustainability for Saim Dabi Plantation Berhad, Dato' Lau Bing Chu, who is the Secretary General of World Baseball Softball Confederation, Salika Sutsuwan, Director of Clients and Markets of PwC Malaysia, Sharmila Ravindran, one of the founders and board advisor of Lead in Malaysia, and she's a practicing lawyer and partner in Ravindran and Azmi Chambers. So before we start, I think it's important to take a little bit of time to celebrate. What are we celebrating? The Sexual Harassment Bill that's currently going through Parliament and hopefully soon to be passed. It's been a super long journey to get us here, and women and men in the gender equality sector, women's rights activists, feminist activists have been working for decades to bring us to this place. This is going to be ground shifting ground changing. It is going to transform this whole area of corporate practices, diversity, equality, and inclusion. What does sustainability mean, social sustainability within the ESG framework? What does it mean for corporate actors in Malaysia? So, but before we go into, really unpacking the issues and hearing from all of our experts, I would like to make a point about women's aid organization and what powers us. The voices and experiences of women that we call lived experiences. So WAO has always advocated for gender equality, to end violence against women and girls, to end discrimination against women and girls, but that in and of itself is not enough. We need to see transformational change within our society. We need to see change in structures, in substance, in culture, the sort of transformative change that doesn't just have a constitutional guarantee against gender discrimination, a piece of legislation that seeks to address discrimination or harassment or violence against women. We need to have a whole of society approach, a cultural change, a change of rethinking. We need to understand that what we have right now, not just in Malaysia, but also globally, is a structure and system that has over many generations been set up by men for men. And that is something that we cannot get away from. But for as long as we preserve and maintain that traditional orthodox structure, the other genders, the other half, will never be able to participate as equals. So this is what we mean by transformative change. Transformative change is actually being clear-eyed, open-minded, and smart enough to look at the structures and systems that we have in place, to break it down, to unpack it, to understand what needs to change, and to build it back better. So now we are in this post-pandemic period, and the pandemic, we all know, has done so many things to pull back the advancement of women that we may have enjoyed over the past few decades. The numbers of women who have lost jobs or have fallen out of employment has been tremendous. We know also that families being locked down together over long periods of time has led to the growth of the shadow pandemic of domestic violence, violence against women and children within the household. We have data, we have knowledge, we have lived experiences that points towards all of this. But now we have an opportunity to change. As the saying goes, there is always opportunity in crisis. And right now, what I would like to challenge everyone here, and also to challenge our speakers, and to challenge corporate Malaysia. Let's look at what is changing. Let's look at what needs to change further, and let's make that change. Before I close, I just would like to talk a little bit about culture and how cultural attitudes in Malaysia need to change. WAO has done extensive research on what we call violence endorsing attitudes in Malaysia. And violence endorsing attitudes in Malaysia is not just about what people think about violence against women and girls, but also what do people in Malaysia think about gender equality. And the results were very, very sobering. And I would strongly encourage everyone to go to WAO's website and take a look at the results of that survey. And that will show us very clearly, especially those of us who are within the corporate space. We need to know what we need to change in terms of our bias, our cultural biases, and the prevalent cultural orthodoxy that is now accepted as the norm in Malaysia. It needs to change. Until and unless that changes, We will never have true equality, full participation, women being able to be the best of everything that they need and must be the other half of Malaysia. We need to see that change, and that change needs to happen. I want to step back into lived realities. And lived realities are so critically important for us to understand. The voices of women and men who have faced sexual harassment, they have been silenced. They have been silenced. They have been quiet. They have been invisible. They have been unheard. And now with this new legislation coming out, let's hope that together we are going to be able to create an environment where they can actually step up, speak out, be heard, get justice, and live the life that they are meant to live. A life that is equal, that is full, and that is completely sustainable for them and their families. So I'm really looking forward to today, and thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you, Sumitra, for those insightful words. I would like to echo Sumitra and also reaffirm how excited we are to platform such an important conversation on sexual harassment today. Next, I would like to pass the floor to Yuren Sung, Deputy Executive Director of Women's Aid Organization and Advocacy Director, to give us a brief overview of sexual harassment in Malaysia and what it constitutes, which will help us contextualize today's discussion. With that, I'll pass the floor to you, Ren.
Thank you, Kiran. Hi, everyone. I trust you can see my slides. If you can't, please let me know. This is just a short presentation to sort of set the stage, give some background information to hopefully contextualize the discussion that we're having today. So really briefly, sexual harassment generally means an action that has three elements: something that's sexual in nature, something that is unwanted, and something that has some kind of negative impact on the recipient. So this could be something to their personal offense, humiliation, but also has effects on how they can perform in different spaces. For example, inability to work or inability to study, or so on. So just, a quick example: a lecturer messaging a student late at night asking about making some kind of sexual comment. That would be an example of sexual harassment. An e-hailing driver who messages a passenger after the ride and making comments on how that person looks. So that's another example of sexual harassment. Okay, we have some overarching high-level obligations and aspirations to address sexual harassment, and these things sort of can guide our policy direction. So we of course have SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals, and there are a number of goals, targets and indicators relating to sexual harassment. So of course there's SDG 5 on gender equality, but there's also SDG 4 and 8 on education and employment that also are relevant to sexual harassment. Of course, we have CEDAW, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, that specifies that governments have to collect information on sexual harassment, as well as take legal and other measures to protect women against sexual harassment in the workplace and other places. And lastly, we can highlight the ESGs, or the environmental, social, and governance considerations that relate to sexual harassment. Of course, the big one being social, in a sense that policies regarding things like inclusion, diversity, harassment, including sexual harassment, these are relevant to the S component. And it's also said that perhaps on the governance as well. So this comes to the idea of management taking into consideration things that are important to their workforce, and sexual harassment could be one of those things. Just to highlight something that was said by Shahril Hamdan, of course, he's the Prime Minister's Office Economic Director. So he links very closely ESG to sexual harassment. He's saying that workforce diversity and labor welfare are other vital dimensions of ESG principles for Malaysia's businesses. It is top management's responsibility to provide healthy and safe workplace for their employees. A safe workplace is essential to productivity, and all companies should regard sexual harassment as severe misconduct and impose a zero tolerance policy. So we see here from the highest level of policymaking, there's a connection between ESG and sexual harassment being made. Okay, so sexual harassment in Malaysia, how do we fit in so far? How do we stand? Quite a few studies have been done in the last 2 and 3 years regarding sexual harassment. Quite a few surveys by very the standard and reputable research companies. So YouGov found 28%, and over a third of women in Malaysia have experienced sexual harassment. WAO and VAS.ai found of working women, 62% have experienced some form of sexual harassment. Awam and CENGPS, a think tank, also did a study last year, finding that, for example, 57% of young women are regularly verbally harassed on the streets. 44% of women have witnessed their teacher making sexual provocative jokes. And recently, Ipsos released a study showing that sexual harassment was identified by Malaysians as the most important issue facing women and girls in the country. So they were given a list of issues, including economic and other issues, and they chose sexual harassment as the number one. So as it relates to women and girls. So it's a huge concern, and it happens in the workplace, but as well other places. So where does it happen? This is from YouGov, all spheres of life, but of note, these top 4 bars here are quite significant. And I want you to draw attention to the 3 bars over here at the office, on public transport, at schools, universities. So these places are not just any context. These are places where there is some kind of governing body or organization responsible for those spaces. So that points to the idea that these governing bodies, maybe there's a role to play, organizational obligations to respond to sexual harassment. We have several laws that relate to sexual harassment. Not exactly, but some are specific to sexual harassment. We have criminal laws, of course. We have employment laws and guidelines, as well as the tort of sexual harassment. And upcoming law reforms include the amendment to the Employment Act, which has a provision on sexual harassment that was passed in the Dewan Rakyat yesterday. And more importantly, the Anti-Sexual Harassment Act. So this is something that has been tabled, but it's still in the process. And, relating to this Anti-Sexual Harassment Act, WAO, of course, with the support of YST and other partners, other NGOs and groups, have been engaging with the government on this Sexual Harassment Act, and we're continuing to work with the government and engage the government and other stakeholders to try and improve the bill. We find that there's the key issue of organizational obligations is missing from the bill. So we want that to be included before it's passed into law. Okay, that's all I have. Hopefully that gave a sort of just brief context and background for the conversation today. And I pass it back to Kieran.
Thank you, Ren, for that comprehensive background on sexual harassment. I'm sure we'll all find that information especially useful and relevant when listening to today's panel discussion. Next, I'd like to pass the floor back to Sumitra, our panel moderator for today's event, to welcome our esteemed speakers and panelists and begin moderating today's panel discussion. Over to you, Sumitra.
Thanks so much, Kieran. So we're really lucky today. We have 5 amazing people who have all proved their mettle in various ways in the area of, either HR or, corporate governance, sports, and also not just in the legal areas, but also in terms of support and mentorship for women in the corporate space. So I'm absolutely delighted to invite our 5 panelists, Michelle and Ike from Sime Darby Property, Rashid Reza, Head Group Sustainability of Sime Darby Plantation, Dato' Lau Beng Chu, who is Secretary General of the World Baseball Softball Confederation, Salika Suksuwan, Director of Clients and Markets of PwC Malaysia, and Sharmila Ravindran, who is Board of Advisors Leaning Malaysia and also a partner of Ravindran and Azmi Chambers. So to start, okay, so before that, just maybe to give you an overview of how we are going to, run this panel. So we have our 5 experts who will actually kick off our discussion by each of them spending about 5 minutes giving us a little bit of an introduction and in a preamble to specific issues related to our obligations when it comes to response and prevention of sexual harassment. And I would very much like to first call upon Salika Suksuwan. She's the Director of Clients and Markets of PwC Malaysia. She has spent 24 years as an HR practitioner. Her experience and passion lies in the areas of developing young talent and advancing women in the workforce. In her previous role as head of human capital, she has led a team to strengthen PwC's position as a leading employer in Malaysia with progressive work-life practices and innovative talent programs. So I would really like for Salika to talk to us about the frameworks, the policies, the procedures that really need to be in place to ensure that we have safe and healthy working environments where there is indeed respect and therefore prevention of sexual harassment. Over to you, Salika.
Thank you very much, Sumitra, for that kind introduction. A very good afternoon to our organizers from DWAO and Yayasan Saim Darby, my fellow panelists, and to all our audience. Such a privilege to be with all of you in the session today on this very important matter. I'll share my experience as a HR practitioner, and also in recent years, right before the pandemic, I have been part of the Ethics and Business Conduct Committee in my role as the Ethics Officer for PwC Malaysia. So prior to the pandemic, we were working in the office with, we monitor, speak up, we call it speak up, matters that were raised to the Ethics and Business Conduct Committee. So over the years, we would get an average of about 10 to 15% a year from the total number of speak up that were raised. The 10 to 15% would be in relation to harassment, and mainly sexual harassment, and the victims are mainly women. There were the odd 1 or 2 cases on men, but mostly they were on women. Some actually happen in our clients' offices, not in the PwC office, but for all matters that were brought to our attention, we would make sure that every single case is being investigated upon. Yeah, so I would say that although we looked into every case, I'm quite sure that there were cases that were not brought to our attention. And why do I say this? Because I feel that sexual harassment cases happen around us, and it's quite prevalent, but many go unreported, right? That's my personal gauge, because when I read up about it and when I listen to anecdotal stories, yeah, I also read a recent report on the women in the workplace by ACCA Malaysia. It says that only 18% of women inform HR, and another 12% reported the incident to authorities. And anecdotally, I'm sure some of you in the audience, myself included, we have had our own experiences as well, right? And oftentimes, these matters may not be raised, right? And why is that? We know why, right? It's fear of retaliation. I think that's the main reason, and especially when it is in relation to perpetrators who are their superiors or senior members of the organization, right? There are concerns about allegations that it could be consensual, or the woman herself may have encouraged the behavior. Some are embarrassed, some fear ridicule, and some fear losing their jobs. And these women who have actually shared with me their sentiments, even after they come forward, right? They are still afraid. So specific to a professional services environment like ours, there are also cases that are in relation to our clients, and there will be fear, right? Fear as to how our clients may respond if we escalate the matter. So what are some of the steps we take in the organization to address the situation? And I'm sure many of you can relate to having, a code of conduct in your own organization. Yeah. And, in our organization, the code of conduct is made available, publicly available. You can actually Google PwC Code of Conduct. It's available on the website. But we address a broader issue, right? In a broader context of respect in the workplace. Yeah. And respect is how we treat each other. So we don't zoom in on only sexual harassment. It's a broader context of respect. And we encourage our people to speak up, listen up, and we will follow up. Yeah. So the code of conduct has a framework that all of us can refer to, a common set of guidelines for us to behave professionally, to understand what are acceptable behaviors, guided by our purpose and our values. So in the code of conduct, we explain that we don't tolerate harassment, we do not tolerate discrimination, bullying, or any form of disrespectful behavior. So with that, the Ethics and Business Conduct Committee will use the Code of Conduct as our guideline, a framework. So what we do is this committee comprises senior partners and also the head of human capital. We are independent of the management team, and we assure our staff that every matter that is brought to the attention of the committee, we will investigate. Yeah, and we do have regular calls among the EBCC committee and also with our global team. We share best practices and we discuss how to manage some of the complex issues. We also reassure our people of strict confidentiality. And in encouraging the speak up culture, we also explain that we speak up for ourselves, for each other. Even if you observe inappropriate behavior, you are to speak up and come forward, right? And then the whistleblower will be protected. And we also ensure that we do not tolerate retaliation. So that's really, really important for us to assure the complainant that, any form of retaliation will be dealt with. So for example, if the person is being harassed, we reach out to the perpetrator, the alleged perpetrator, and we really categorically explain that in no way whatsoever should you retaliate. If we hear from the victim that you are in touch in any way whatsoever, we will certainly take action against you, even during the investigation. Yeah. So these are some of the measures that we have in place for our people. But the proof of the pudding, however, is not whether we have policies and procedures, right? It's whether our people feel that it's safe to come forward. Do they have the courage, to raise the issues that they face? And, if each of us do our part to build that trust, it will contribute to what Sumitra was explaining about a whole of society approach. So every one of us here today in this call, we need to take that personal responsibility, and we have a role to play in advancing this matter and making sure that our people have a safe environment for them to come to work and bring their best to work. So that's where we have in terms of context and our policies. I will now hand this back over to Sumitra so we can hear from the other panelists as well.
Thanks so much, Salika. I absolutely love that speak up, listen up, and follow up. And I think everybody on the panel will probably also recognize the criticality of our people, the employees, to have faith and trust in the process, right? And I think, that very, very strong commitment to protect the victim and to make sure that the, alleged perpetrator is aware that they cannot retaliate. And if they retaliate, that in and of itself is also something very serious. And then I also wanted to talk about, maybe we can unpack this, in the second round, and that is that whole culture of victim blaming. And that is the one thing that really does hold a lot of survivors back from reporting, and that is the fear of being blamed. But finally, at the end of the day, it's really about culture building that culture within the organization. And I wonder if I can move over to Rashid. Rashid Reza, who is head group sustainability for Sime Darby Plantation Berhad. So Rashid has over 20 years experience in corporate and advisory roles in different industries. He's currently part of the sustainability team of Sime Darby Plantation. And before joining Sime Darby, he has spent 15 years in corporate advisory roles around sustainability, strategy, program management, and a whole load of other areas in various sectors like telecoms, property, automotive, oil and gas, and the public sector. So Rashid is very much qualified to talk to us about the next area that we want to unpack, and that is the S in the ESG. Like what we heard earlier from Ren Chung of what, and who pointed out what Sharil Hamdan had raised earlier, and that is prevention and response of sexual harassment. Having a zero tolerance towards it is very much part of the sustainability, corporate sustainability. So Rashid, I wonder if you can talk to us a little bit about what your experience is with that, and perhaps within your own corporate space.
Thank you, Sumitra, and good afternoon, everybody, and thank you to the organizers for inviting us to share a bit of our experience around this very important subject matter, right? So just to give a bit of context for Sime Darby Plantation, right? I mean, you talk about E, S, and G. I mean, what does sustainability mean for Sime Darby Plantation? So I'll start from the very top, right? So for us, we actually have what we call the sustainability purpose, and what we sort of identified what our focus areas around sustainability are. And the first one is basically, around climate action and how we basically are part of, try to be part of the solution to climate change. The second one is basically looking at how we contribute to a better society, and how do we help people thrive. And the third one is about inclusive development, and how do we make sure that the sort of practices that we have implemented in our own operations are replicated throughout our supply chain and throughout the industry as well. So in general, those are the three big buckets when it comes to E, S, and G for us, right? And for this particular subject that we're talking about today, it's basically in the second bucket just now, around how we contribute to a better society, the S part of E, S, and G. And basically that's where, we sort of have multiple efforts around, social performance, human rights, respecting the rights of workers, fair labor practices, and so on and so forth. So just to take a step back, I mean, just to give a bit of context again of our operations, right? Especially in the agriculture sector, because, we face certain challenges which may be more unique to us, right? So just to give a bit of context, I mean, for us in our sector, we operate in some of the most remote areas around the world, some of the most undeveloped areas in the world, and it's spread across multiple locations. So, for example, in Malaysia itself, right? I mean, we operate in more than 300,000 hectares of operations across Malaysia. And just to give you guys, everybody here, a bit of context, that is 4 times the size of Singapore. And it's actually spread across more than 150 locations across Peninsular Malaysia, Sabah and Sarawak. And we have more than 20,000 workers across these 150 locations. And they're from multiple nationalities, talking multiple languages at different levels of literacy levels, and both female and male workers as well. So it imposes a large challenge on how do we translate from policy to practice on the ground. And around our 150 locations just in Malaysia itself, how do we ensure that these policies and practices are effectively translated and people really, walk the talk in the operations itself, right? So on our side, basically, we actually have introduced our sexual harassment sort of policy back in 2013, and basically we actually revised it back in 2019. I mean, I won't go through in much detail our actual policy itself, but there are certain guiding principles that we actually put into our policy. So things like accountability of every employee to be appropriate, prompt inquiry and action, confidentiality, support and protection for complainant, education and awareness. So those are some of the guiding principles as part of our sexual harassment policy. But that's from the policy side of things at HQ. The big question is basically how does that actually translate to action on the ground, and how is it being monitored on the ground, right? So that's where it's basically like what Salika mentioned earlier. It is in the context of our operations, it's a massive cultural change that's needed, and it's a massive sort of change, for lack of a better word, change management process that's needed across our entire operations. So just to give a bit of examples of some of the things that we've sort of implemented. So for example, in Malaysia itself, we like what I mentioned, so we have more than 150 locations across Malaysia, and each and every one of these operating units itself, what we've done is we've actually implemented what we call gender committees. So the gender committees themselves, they are representatives of female sort of representatives at that particular operating unit itself. And then they would then empowered to discuss around social and related matters, including sexual harassment and abuse cases at the operating unit level. And then they are also empowered to report directly to the regional team on any matters with regards to issues, areas of improvement, and so on and so forth. And these are things that we've introduced for quite a while as well. Other things that we've also introduced is things like gender representatives. So for each and every operating unit on top of the grievance committee, we've also identified gender representatives, where there will be a gender representative from the staff level, and also a gender representative from the workers level as well. So the role of these people are basically to work and engage with the workers and staff at each and every operating unit to basically discuss and come up with solutions to issues with regards to gender related matters amongst others. And what we've done as well is we've undertaken a massive awareness raising and capacity building program as well. So one of the things that we've done is basically we've actually partnered with WAO previously, back a couple of years back, if not mistaken, where we've undertaken a whole capacity building program for more than 300 of our gender representatives and some of our staff as well. And the key sort of thing that we wanted as an outcome for this is basically for these people who are representing their respective constituents to really understand with regards to sexual harassment and gender related matters, what are the real issues, how do you spot them, and what are the avenues with regards to if they find an issue, how do they then escalate them or raise it to the appropriate sort of channels. And this we've also recently just completed another round of refresher training for all of our gender representatives. And then what we've also done is we've conducted training sessions for all of our workers in Malaysia, for example. So out of all of the 20,000+ workers in Malaysia, we've conducted briefing sessions to them around what the expected behaviors are and what the unacceptable behaviors are, and basically things like where if they find any sort of issues, which are the channels that are made available to them. And this brings along the other sort of key sort of governance portion of what we've implemented, which is basically the grievance channels which are made available to all of our workers on the ground. So we actually have we've actually rolled out 3 grievance channels which are made available to all of our workers, and basically these grievance channels are made available in all different national languages of our workers as well. And the key thing that we wanted to get out of this rollout of grievance channels is basically number 1, to raise awareness. So people really need to know that these grievance channels are available to them and what sort of issues that they can raise to these grievance channels. And number 2, and more importantly, is to raise the trust levels of these grievance mechanisms as well. Because at the end of the day, if they are aware but they do not trust these channels, you might as well not have them, right? So the key thing about ensuring their trust on these grievance channels is number 1, the sort of option of anonymity is there. So if the particular worker does want to remain anonymous, it is an option for them to do so. And then in the event that these issues are raised to these grievance mechanisms, it actually goes all the way to HQ, and the HQ team will then ensure that there are no retaliation to anyone who basically raises grievances through these grievance channels, and more importantly, to undergo a rigorous investigation process to ensure that all grievances that are raised are basically investigated, and the outcomes of these investigations are then reported back to the worker themselves. So that's just some of the examples of some of the things that we do. But I think I like to echo what Salika mentioned just now, right? At the end of the day, it's about ensuring that the workers and all of our employees feel safe in our sort of operations across the world. And for us, the challenge is basically in the agriculture sector, we're spread across so many different locations and in such remote areas that additional efforts are needed to make sure that trust is there on the mechanisms which are made available to our workers. So I think I'll stop here for now, and happy to discuss further later.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you so much, Rashid. And I think a few things really resonate. And when you have 20,000 employees spread over large geographic areas that are mostly remote, your challenges are massive. And that massive cultural change that needs to occur. I hope that later we have time to kind of unpack a bit more, perhaps some of the ideas that that could be raised by the other panelists on how this could possibly be achieved. It's a huge challenge, but nonetheless so important, because yes, absolutely, regardless of who they are, how many they are, and where they are, they must have that faith and trust that there is a process in place that is meaningful and that indeed will protect them and get them justice. So yeah, so thank you so much for that. And so I'd like to move on right now to Michelle N. Ike. So Michelle is Chief People Officer of Sime Darby Property Berhad. She has been driving Sime Darby Properties' strategic direction. She is a trained telecommunications engineer. She has worked in marketing and corporate communication roles across various industries like hospitality and travel. And then she went into financial services, ultimately leadership development and innovation, capacity building and diversity as head of talent, learning and performance at City Malaysia. So in her current role, there are additional things as well that she is involved in. For instance, she was leadership coach and mentor to 2019 Obama Foundation Leaders in Asia Pacific. She is an industry mentor for women's empowerment with Lean In Malaysia, and also volunteers for the 30% Club Malaysia. Michelle, you have so much experience across so many different industries, and I feel that what would be really interesting for us is if you can share with us some like real stories, real experiences, and also what learning points did those experiences raise for you, and which would also edify us. Take it away, Michelle.
Thank you very much, Sumitra, and good afternoon, everyone. Wonderful to be part of this very esteemed panel. and on such an important and timely topic as well. So I didn't prepare a deck, and being in all transparency, I've only recently joined, had the privilege of joining Sime Darby Property as their Chief People Officer. And so I am not able to speak so much on the aspect of where we are. We're currently looking into formalizing a policy that addresses sexual harassment in the workplace, a policy, a grievance procedure that is separate from our standard grievance procedure, making sure that we understand very clearly what are the redress avenues for victims of sexual harassment, as well as clear guidelines for what might be penalizations according to severity and gravity of the situation for proven perpetrators. As well as panels for appeal. I'm sure there needs to be some mechanism for appeal if people feel that they are not addressed fairly within the context of whatever structure that we provide in the workplace. So that's in all transparency very much a work in progress at Sime Darby Property. And so to your point, Sumitra, about sharing experiences that might hopefully prove edifying, to use a very big word, hopefully the little stories that I share will prove insightful. In terms of building a culture where sexual harassment ideally is no longer prevalent, in my observations working across different types of organizations, there are, I think, three aspects which I think are important for us to kind of consider. Firstly, reiterating a point made by Salika earlier around a safe space for us to talk about this, because it's quite an awkward topic to talk about. It's not something that naturally arises. Ideally, it would naturally arise in your normal kedai kopi teh tarik mama session, right? Ideally, you're not bringing up sexual harassment in your teh tarik sessions. So we really do need to put aside a safe space to talk about these things. And I found one of the experiences that I had in another workplace where, to Salika's point, this is not the issue of sexual harassment falls under a broader umbrella of respect at the workplace. And in that organization, there were a lot of workshops carried out to address respect at the workplace, encompassing not just sexual harassment, but bullying and discrimination and general harassment. And what we would do was to actually share real life, anonymized case studies of where these things happened in the workplace, and anonymized all the names, and kind of walked people through what happened and asked the audience to think through what is appropriate, what is not appropriate, what would you do, what should the people have done in this scenario. And in surfacing some of the sexual harassment cases, you could really see the light bulbs go off in people's heads, like, that happened to me too, or that's harassment. I could have complained about that. I thought I was just uncomfortable, and the manager was just being a bit dodgy. If I'd known and if I knew that there was an avenue, I would have taken action. So there's always this case of where when you start educating people and you create more awareness, suddenly the cases seem to melambung, right? And it's not because necessarily that in the past it was the good old days that nothing like this happened, but that people become more educated and they understand that the boundaries have been crossed, and that those were inappropriate, and you have redress. And one of the things that I feel is very important about creating this kind of awareness is also giving people access to other people who've experienced similar. And so one of the observations that I had in a particular session, so it was quite well set up in that the workshops were held concurrently by HR practitioners as well as business managers. So they were trained in delivering the material and conducting, the case study discussions. So one of the business managers, a female business manager, actually shared some tips to the audience around what they could do. And it was very interesting, right? So she said, have you ever had the displeasure of having your hand shaken, and this is obviously pre-COVID when people could shake hands, right? And as you're shaking hands, somebody tickles you, sort of like a bit cheeky, tickling you on your hand. Have you ever had that? Obviously, they're not. It's not positive intent, not pure intent, right? So all you have to do is let your grip loosen, like let your grasp go limp, And then you'll find that naturally the human tendency is to drop the hand. So then they can't hold on to your hand. And if they go further, then you have to say something. And another example she gave was where her staff, and this was in the service industry. So one of her staff was servicing a high net worth client. And the unfortunately male client said to the female service representative, you would look much better if your skirt was shorter. And of course, as women, we're not prepared. We're never really prepared. Now maybe it's different, and I certainly, now that I'm discussing this topic, I'll probably prepare my daughter a little bit better. But certainly when I was growing up, my mother never sat me down as a life lesson. Okay, this is how you deal with sexual harassment. When inappropriate comments come your way, this is how you deal with it, right? Nobody sits you down. So I think it is a responsibility of the organization to create, some sort of awareness in that normal women would not understand this. So when that staff, coming back to the story, when the staff experienced it, she didn't know what to do. She didn't want to risk offending the very, senior client, high net worth, very senior client. So she said nothing, but she felt uncomfortable enough that she brought it up. She escalated it, brought it up to the manager. And so now this business manager who was running the workshop said, had she been in a position to advise that young staff then, she would have educated her to stand firm and state the boundaries. So for example, she could have said, "Dear Mr. XYZ, please respect me as I respect you." And that would be one step to establishing your boundaries. And of course, some people, they may stop there, which is good because they understand they've overstepped the lines. Some may take it further, in which case then the staff needs to know that there's backup for them, right? So that's one thing, I think, creating that safe space to talk about it, become aware of what is what. I myself, as an engineer, my first job was as an engineer, and I didn't realize at the time it probably constituted sexual harassment, but I was an engineer. I joined the workforce at the same time as a male colleague. And I noticed that while he got all the professional, technical questions, engineering questions, my questions were always around whether I was married or engaged or had a boyfriend and wanted to go out. And what that did to me was I didn't realize, what was happening. I just thought I just have to not wear makeup, tie my hair in a bun, wear flat shoes, just completely desexualize any aspect of my appearance in order to be taken seriously. And what that does, I think, to any female talent is that, there's this phenomenon called covering. I'm not sure if you guys have heard of covering. So it's a phenomenon where in order to feel like you belong in an environment, you will cover who you truly are so that you can fit in. And so I realize now in hindsight, that was what I was doing. I was covering, I was trying to make myself invisible so that I wouldn't be a recipient of such comments. And at the end of the day, I tried to get out of that environment because I just really didn't feel I could, give my full self. If you are spending so much energy covering who you truly are so that you feel safe, you can't devote similar energy to doing the work at hand. And so, workplaces really stand to lose, right? So it's creating a safe space is one. We've spoken a lot about women being the victims, but I want to share that in the same workshops that we ran, one of the case studies involved, and again, this was a real life thing, but it was anonymized, a male subordinate who had a consensual relationship with his female superior. And that, of course, already was like a no-no. Consensuality aside, no superior and subordinate should have a relationship because of the conflict of interest, right? So in this instance, they did have a consensual relationship. And for whatever reason, the male subordinate decided that he no longer wished to be in a relationship with the female boss. And so, stop going out with her, etc. And that's when a lot of comments around his suitability for his portfolio started coming. And, the classic sexual harassment hints and innuendo that since you're no longer in love with me, you're no longer fit for purpose for the role. So I remember distinctly one instance where I paused and I asked, I said, okay, women, do not put up your hand, right? Men, who thinks this is sexual harassment, right? And I kid you not, in a room of 100 people, no man put their hand up. No man said that what the male subordinate had to endure was sexual harassment. And when I probed, why is that? You know, culturally, they said, that's what happens. If you break up with a girl, I like that lah. You know, you have to accept that the you know, nuclear fallout that comes when you end a relationship with a woman, it's like that. So there's, you know, it's there's all these cultural, you know, barriers also against us recognizing that men can be equally, out of ignorance, out of cultural bias, equally be prone and victim to sexual harassment. Another third aspect that I feel we need to kind of have more of a discussion around is how do we equip managers to be supportive so that they can, if they see signs of trouble, etc., or they see their staff needing help, how can they play a role without overstepping boundaries and all the rest of it? And I say this because I remember in that instance where I myself was going through arguably minor sexual harassment, minor. I didn't recognize it for what it was. I knew I was uncomfortable, but I was doubting myself too much. And I thought, you know, maybe I'm just making it too much of a big deal. But my manager, my male manager, actually flagged it to me. And the way that he flagged it to me was via an apology. And that he said, Michelle, I'm so sorry. I see this happening in meetings, but I don't know how to help you. I don't know how to help you. And I thought it was just very decent and sweet of him to even be aware and to want to try. And both of us there, you know, this was, you know, probably about 15, 20 years ago, both of us sitting there, sitting ducks, pretty clueless about how to manage everything. So this is a completely, you know, welcome topic. I think more of us should make this less awkward, less taboo subject to talk about so that both employees, as well as their managers, the wider organization, whether you're male, female, whatever gender, can be equipped to deal with sexual harassment as it arises in the workplace. Over back to you, Sumitra.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Michelle. You know, I love women's stories. You're such a wonderful storyteller, and you brought these instances to life. And as you were talking about them, I think so many of us can recognize that, yes, that I experienced that as well. And for me, it's covering, right? Because I used to work with the United Nations in remote places where wars were going on, and it was absolutely misogynistic and sexist. So I used to dress myself up like a little soldier and act tough and, you know, and everything else that comes with it. And that was the covering that I just couldn't deal with anymore. And so I came home and joined WAO. Hurrah. So yeah, so many important things, but just one thing that I wanted to pull out from what you said, and that is, you know, that the survivor can also be a man. And this goes to like the very heart of the approach that we have as feminists, and that is fundamentally, it's about that power imbalance. So you have a supervisor, a woman, but the power imbalance is very much, you know, tilted towards her. And in that situation, it is absolutely an abuse of power and disempowering and removing rights from another individual who is less power than you. And that is absolutely wrong. And I think also the YouGov survey, if we look at the YouGov survey, we will actually see that the incidence of sexual harassment faced by young boys and men in Malaysia is extremely high, but also that the perpetrators tend to be older men. And that YouGov survey is really eye-opening and really worth looking at. So I'm really mindful that this is such an interesting conversation, but we have two more speakers, and I would very much like to move on to Dato' Lau Beng Chew. Beng Chew is an advocate and solicitor, and she's a registered mediator as well of the Malaysian Bar Council's Mediation Center. She has been an active sportswoman and now has become very active in sports administration and governance. She's the Secretary General of the World Baseball Softball Confederation. She has been the president of Softball Asia She's been the technical chair for the sport of softball at previous Southeast Asian Asian Games and the Olympic Games. She's a member of the Ethics Committee of the International World Games Organization and a member of the Ethics Commission of the Commonwealth Games Federation. And I know that Beng Chu has some very clear-eyed views on the issue of harassment and sexual harassment in the sports industry. And I wonder, Beng Chu, if you can talk to us a bit on what you feel we could do locally in Malaysia to address this so that we can ensure a respectful and safe sports industry in Malaysia. Beng Chu, over to you.
Thank you, Sumitra, for the very kind invitation. And I thank the organizers for this kind invitation. In fact, I feel very humbled by the established, esteemed members of the panel with such an rich experience on the topic. I would say that sport is no different from any of the other industries, whether it's economic or in the corporate section. In fact, I think the topic is even more relevant in sport because, we do have a lot of programs that involve junior athletes. And you also have a lot of situations where athlete interacts with that. Thank you, Sumitra, for the kind introduction. And also thank the organizers for inviting me to speak about, very bold of them, to bring up such an important but very uncomfortable subject that people don't want to talk about. And I'm actually quite humbled by the esteemed speakers of the panel with their rich experience on the topic. I would say that sport is no different from any of the other industries. I mean, like what Salika mentioned, you're talking about respect, mutual respect. And then when Rashid talks about, what do we do to protect people that work with you? And as Michelle said, the need to create a safe environment. This is even more in sport. Because, in sport, most of the times, there's an upper person and there's a lower person in a sense of a hierarchy. And it's even more relevant because, in sport, we have a lot of junior programs which involve junior athletes, where parents tell you that we trust you with my daughter or even my son, and you did not protect him or her. It's even more important. And I think it was a very hot topic, sexual harassment. But in sport, we talk generally about harassment and abuse. It was a very hot topic, when they had the Me Too movement that was going around globally. And I think many of you are familiar with the US gymnastics case. Can you imagine even in the US where people speak up and they're aware of their rights? It took them decades of complaints which fell on deaf ears or which people just looked the other way. Before there was a conviction, and now there's an out-of-court, a multi-million out-of-court settlement. But it was not just the official involved, and this was a supposedly very trusted official. And it was in a sport where physical contact is so important, in guiding, the movements. And then, there's a lot of confidentiality involved as well. So it was a very hot topic at one time, even in Malaysia. I mean, the Ministry of Youth and Sport and also the National Sports Council, came on board when we were also pushing for it to try to form a sexual harassment committee. And I was asked to join that committee. But later on, after some discussion, they agreed that it should be renamed the Harassment and Abuse Committee. But that was as far as it went. But from what I know, I've never been asked, although we've been asking what's happening, when do we meet, where's the setup, where's the backup, what's the support, logistics. I'm not sure whether it got off the ground, unfortunately, but it is a topic, I think, even more relevant. I mean, if you imagine in the US, in the United Kingdom, but this is such a sensitive subject, and it happens there even when the athletes speak up, even when the officials speak up. Can you imagine in Asia where most of the, especially the younger athletes and especially the younger girls, they wouldn't dare to say anything. And, as Michelle mentioned, and even as Salika mentioned, that where people accept that that's the situation. So it's no different. And I must say, I want to congratulate the people who've been working on the Anti-Sexual Harassment Bill. But it is very disappointing to note that the organizational obligation section has been removed. And I'm happy to say that in sports, we are moving in the opposite direction. The organizations, if you want to be known as a credible organization, if you want to be known as a good governance organization, then you better make sure that you have, you set up an integrity unit or you establish it. Then you have an independent integrity committee. And one of the sections, a very important arm of that would be the harassment and abuse, safeguarding against harassment and abuse. So it is a given that, you know, any international sport organization or even regional sport organization is a must-have. It's not even no questions asked about, you know, should we have this or why it should be an individual. No, it's, if you want to govern your sport, if you want to have authority over your authorities when they come to your competitions, then you need to look after them. And therefore, you need to ensure that you are able to protect them and safeguard them, and also provide an avenue for them if they need to. So as I said, in sports, it's a must. There are obligations. You want to govern, you govern properly. Right? So one of the very important things that is a must is that you need to have a code, not just on sexual harassment. Sexual harassment is one part of the harassment, safeguarding against harassment and abuse in general, because it's not just, it could be a very simple case of, you know, the coach physically, you know, I mean, there have been situations where the coach slaps the athletes, you know, in front of everyone for failing to win or failing to do something. So it's not in a sense a sexual harassment, but it's an abuse, which is also a very important topic. And then, of course, you do have complaints about, you know, sexual harassment where, you know, the coach says that, look, you know, your future of representing the country or representing your state or whatever lies in my hands. So if you don't do what I tell you, that's the end of your athletic career. So that can also happen. So it's very important to have a code. But of course, like in Malaysia, we have so many laws, you know, but the implementation is a very important element. And therefore, you need to have an independent unit that's going to implement what is it that you say that you will do to protect and safeguard your officials and particularly your athletes, and particularly the junior athletes. That's even more important. And of course, in the international sports arena, it's also very important that the athletes have representation. Not just you select them and they take part and an official decides everything. The athletes are part of, for example, in our organization where we govern baseball and softball globally, our athletes are on our board and they are asked their opinion and their views all the time, and they are part of the decision-making process, and they have a vote. And what they say is very, very important because they are the ones that are involved in the sport. Without them, there's no sport. And of course, the other part that's very important that we have is that we also required to have a safeguarding officer in all our major tournaments and all our major games, where the athletes and the officials know that they have this person. And of course, you cannot just appoint anyone. You have to appoint somebody that you know that people will trust, that's going to be a neutral person, and they will have some authority to do something. They want to ask advice, they want to lodge a complaint. So the safeguarding officer is part and parcel of all the tournaments and all the major events that we have. And this is also in the major games as well. You know, it's not just the Olympics, the Asian Games, but also in our own World Cups and all our World Championships, our Asian Championships as well. And another very important section, you know, that we have as well is what we call building a whistleblower section, which is independent and where confidentiality is very, very important. So these are just some of the steps that are taken, as I said, you know, where sports, we are required to do even more as an organization. If you want to govern, you better do it properly. And these are some of the things that you are required to do. So over back to you, Sumitra.
Wow, Beng Chu, that was so powerful. And I think what you just articulated are, you know, methods, principles, procedures, and standards that are relevant internationally, but which we absolutely need to adopt here locally as well. And so so it's imperative that the legislation also articulates organizational responsibilities. And I think for me, the thing that really jumps out is to balance against the absolute power that coaches, for instance, have over athletes, to make sure that the athletes have representation, that they have a voice, that they have decision-making power, that they sit on boards. And that really is the essence of inclusion, right? And I love your statement. If you want to govern properly. And that is absolutely spot on. And I think from there, we are ready now to move on to Sham. So Shamila Ravindran is on the board of advisors of Lead in Malaysia. And in fact, she was one of the founders of the Lead in Malaysia movement in Malaysia. She is a legal practitioner and a partner in Ravindran and Azmi Chambers. So she is a specialist in dispute resolution and corporate advisory legal services. She's also an adjudicator with the Asian International Arbitration Center. She's been called to the bar since 2004, and her work is diverse. Her legal work is diverse. It covers corporate, commercial, civil disputes, insolvency, bankruptcy, land disputes, execution proceedings. I mean, the list is amazing. And in addition to all of this, she mentors women towards empowerment. And I think that's absolutely astounding, the work that you do. It's so impactful, because even if you're going to impact one woman, you've done an amazing job. So Sham, I would absolutely love to hear your insights, and especially from the perspective of your years of involvement with Lean in Malaysia. Over to you.
Hi, Sumitra. Thank you so much for having me today, Yayasan Saim Darby as well as WAO. I would like to give you a perspective of what's going on in the legal industry first. So recently, in the last couple of years, sexual harassment has been quite a hot topic amongst law firms and lawyers and the Bar Council. I was the chair of the Gender Equality and Diversity Committee for the Kuala Lumpur Bar for a couple of years. And during my tenure, we worked very hard with other activists, other lawyers, to try and raise awareness. We were receiving complaints of sexual harassment at the workplace from lawyers, young lawyers, older lawyers, senior lawyers as well. So to just give you some data and some perspective, let me just go into the background a little bit. In 2014, a baseline study was conducted by the Association of Women Lawyers. This was the first ever nationwide study done for Malaysian law firms that highlighted the problem of sexual harassment in the legal industry in Malaysia. So a total of 20 out of 61 respondents said they were on the receiving end of sexual propositions. In the case of female lawyers, they reported receiving sexual propositions from various categories of persons, apart from colleagues, bosses, and clients, a judge, prison guards, and police officers. So this study revealed that a lot of incidences went unreported as complainants were too afraid to speak up. They were unaware of existing mechanisms put in place by the Bar Council, the lack of confidence in the effectiveness of these so-called mechanisms, and just a general feeling that because the legal fraternity is so small, the fear that they'll never get another job in the legal industry if they pursue a complaint. Then in 2018, the International Bar Association conducted a worldwide study on sexual harassment and bullying at the workplace. 87 Malaysian legal professionals responded to the survey. 81% of the respondents were women. The vast majority worked in law firms. The results indicate that bullying and harassment are significant and is an ongoing problem in Malaysian legal workplaces. 24% of Malaysian female respondents and 6% of Malaysian male respondents had been sexually harassed. In their own words, my colleagues were threatened with words synonymous to "I pay you, so I own you." So this is the culture in a lot of law firms in Malaysia. through the initiative of the Gender Equality and Diversity Committee under the Kuala Lumpur Bar, and of course, all the lawyers who stepped up so publicly spoke about their stories and campaigned against sexual harassment, and the work that was done at the Bar Council level as well. In 2021, the Bar Council recognized sexual harassment as a misconduct under the Legal Profession Act. This took almost 7 years of campaigning. We had a pledge under the KL Bar where we approached law firms to pledge that they would do the best they can to set out, we drafted policies, which we then circulated amongst law firms, and we asked them to adopt these policies, put it up on their website, put it in their law firms, have awareness programs run internally at law firms. So I'm really pleased to say that finally, after all that work, in December of 2021, Bar Council finally recognized sexual harassment as a misconduct. So now we have complainants who can lodge complaints with the Bar Council, and the Bar Council will set up a tribunal, a committee to look into those complaints. So let me just go a little bit into, I think Michelle mentioned this. I don't think sexual harassment is something that only happens to women, but I must say that it mostly happens to women. If you look at the data, I've spoken to male lawyers who have told me that they have been sexually harassed, but they don't generally. I think it's also awareness and education. A lot of men are made to feel that they are supposed to enjoy the attention, or if I speak out, then I don't look masculine enough, I don't know how to handle the situation. So when we've had conversations with male lawyers, and they say we rather not bring it up, if it happens, we just kind of brush it off and we move on. But recently, it's very interesting, it's very heartening to see that younger male lawyers are coming forward and speaking openly about it. Younger women lawyers are coming forward and speaking about it. And I think we see a trend, a change in the trend. I was called to the bar in 2004, and things happen at work, which you think you accept as that's the way it is. You work in a law firm, you do litigation, you've got senior counsels who pass certain statements about you, and you think that's the way it is. You suck it up, and you're told by your bosses to suck it up and accept it. And it's tough. It's a tough life. It's a tough job. Do it. But I like that younger women and men are coming forward and saying no. They're drawing boundaries. Those discussions are being had internally at law firms, at the Bar Council, at KL Bar Committee. So it's really heartening to see that happening. Another thing I'd like to really speak about is, do we have any, the question I have is, do we have any comprehensive studies that have been done in Malaysia on the impact of sexual harassment on organizations and companies as well? We are doing a lot. We are doing a lot of work, but do we have the data to support the impact of these policies that we put in place, for example? I did pull out a bit of data. So there have been studies done in the Europe and US that show that sexual harassment causes high turnover, poor working relationships, and affects the financial cost of organizations. Research also shows that sexual harassment costs employers in many ways, including legal and monetary costs, increase in worker absenteeism and sick days, high staff turnover, added cost of rehiring and retraining, adverse public reaction, reduction in employees' productivity, and low morale. A considerable number of organizations now have training programs. I think Michelle has spoken about it, Rashid has, as well as Salika. But I think the question we have to ask is, how effective are these measures? We need the data to see whether the people, your employees are happy with the changes that are, or the policies that have been put in place. There is a study that was conducted by the Harvard Business Review that shows that these training programs may not be as effective as we intended them to be. The only way to assess the effectiveness of these training programs is for organizations to assess and report attrition rates, whether employees feel safer and happier at work. Are men in leadership positions still willing to mentor women after these training sessions? whether opportunities are still abound for women at the workplace. Why I bring this up, and I think this is important, is because when I speak to clients who have set policies in place, the reaction they get from their male employees is that now I'm afraid to speak to a woman, or I'm afraid to have a lunch meeting with a woman in case there are sexual complaints lodged against me. So I'd rather not work with women at all. So how does this impact women at the workplace? And do women leave their career because of this unhappiness? We don't have that data, and that would be something that I think we should really look into. We need to evaluate if these programs are effective. There are things like grievance procedures in place, training programs, etc., policies, etc. Yes, but I think there was something that was mentioned in the Harvard Business Review, which I thought was really interesting. They have something called, there's something called the bystander intervention training, which I really liked. And I pulled that out because it says you train your people to be aware of certain scenarios. So just say, for example, you're at a meeting and a statement is made which is sexual, or someone is being sexualized at a meeting. Then you have a colleagues call it out and say, okay, move it away from that conversation. And so it's really about bringing awareness, making everybody in the organization work as a team, rather than pull out the harassers, pull out the people who are so-called causing the problems, make everyone part of the conversation and be aware that certain conduct is unacceptable. Even if it is it's a statement, it's a one-off statement that you look really nice today, or your skirt should be shorter. And I've had that said to me as well. Oh, why do you always wear pantsuits, Sham? Why don't you wear skirts? So if we have an organization where everybody knows, no, you don't go there, that is the wrong thing to say, that those kind of attitudes need to be called out immediately. So I think that's about it from me. If there's anything else, maybe we can take it up in the Q&A later. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Sham. I think that bystander engagement is extremely important, and it kind of takes me back to what Salika had mentioned earlier in the mechanism that they have: speak up, listen up, follow up, where the speak up is also about other people speaking up on behalf of individuals that they think or that they perceive are being harassed. And I think this bystander intervention is extremely important. I'm so mindful that this is such a rich and interesting conversation, but we're sort of running out of time. But I would like to give everyone an opportunity to have perhaps a few last words. I'm so sorry that we can't actually get to the question and answer. Perhaps what we could do is, share those questions with our panelists, and you could perhaps frame some responses that we could share subsequently on social media. But just maybe one round for everyone to have perhaps a minute to sum up. And I'm just also very moved by the wealth of experience, the amount of work that has been done by all of the speakers, and the knowledge and expertise that they have on this whole thing of creating that safe and respectful workplace, moving and pushing towards cultural change within your industries, ensuring that policies and processes are in place, that people have trust in, that are actually going to get survivors, protect survivors, get survivors access to justice, and then go back to the main thing of building that safe and respectful workplace. So perhaps when you give us your 1 minute wrap up, perhaps you could maybe also talk a little bit on the aspect of the organization's obligation and your thoughts about how important that is to actually allow for the organization to have that space to say, I accept this obligation because it is needed for my safe and respectful workplace. So perhaps we could move to Salika first. Salika, you have about a minute to sum up.
Thanks, Sumitra. I want to emphasize this word trust, right? And also respect, yeah? And easy to say, but how do we build trust in the system to encourage people to come forward? And I feel it begins with us treating each other with respect, with courtesy, with dignity, with fairness, and call out the unacceptable behavior. It is not all right to refer to your female colleagues as chicks or to make fun that it's time of the month, these are not acceptable behavior. So we do need to have the courage to call it out and act on it and have the courage to, be mindful that you need to remind your colleagues in the workplace and the process and the policies we need to uphold in the organization, protect the whistleblowers, ensure confidentiality, emphasize no retaliation policy. So collectively, if all of us take this personal responsibility, I feel we can then encourage that mutual trust and respect, right? So I will end with a quote that I feel very profound from Dalai Lama that I often refer to, right? It's about mutual respect. Yeah, he says mutual respect is the foundation of genuine harmony. So if there's harmony between men, women, between colleagues in the workplace, sexual harassment, I feel, will be reduced.
Thanks so much, Salika. So if we can move over to Rashid. Rashid, from the perspective of the organizational obligation and also recognizing that with your 20,000 plus workforce, the need for cultural change. Any thoughts?
Yeah, so thanks, Smitra. And it definitely has been a very interesting discussion that we've had today. I guess my parting comments is, number one, this is a very important issue that we're talking about here. And everybody has a role to play in basically tackling this. And then for us, the main challenge is basically how do you translate policies into action on the ground? Especially, when it comes to, the breadth of and the scope of our operations, and basically the different cultures that are available, which are available in our operations as well. So it needs a multi-pronged approach and, different sort of solutions and different sort of approaches to sort of, tackle this sort of challenges. And I think, at the end of the day, again, probably, similar to what Salika mentioned, it's about trust. And the trust between, the workers on the ground, with the management, and also with the processes and policies to ensure that, everybody works towards creating a safe space for everyone to work with. So I think that's my parting message. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rashid. If I could ask Michelle, and there is a question that is in the chat box also, and that is about if there was one policy to change to make our country more equal in the workplace, what would you suggest it be? I'm wondering if you can perhaps have a go at answering that.
That's a very difficult, that's like a $1 million question and answering on behalf of the entire country, right? So it's a little bit of a tough one. But I would say that I think just on anecdotally, again, in my experience and observations, I think we have a long way to go in sort of giving women, or let's not say the victims of any sexual harassment, the benefit of the doubt when they surface any kind of allegation. Nobody does it for fun. And of course, there are those instances where, something could be, a false accusation could be raised maliciously. And of course, we need to deal with those scenarios appropriately so that nobody is unjustly accused of sexual harassment. But for the most part, if a woman or a man has to say that they have undergone sexual harassment, it's not a fun experience. And I think we must give people the benefit of the doubt and allow them, create that safety so that they can talk about it. And an example I give you is this lady who'd known someone for the longest time. She considered this gentleman a mentor. They met at a hotel lobby to have a career conversation. And on the way out, as she was excusing herself to leave and past the lift, the gentleman who she'd known for years dragged her into the lift lobby, in the lift, to bring her up to his room. And she had to physically wrestle herself out of his grasp and sort of, make her escape. And that in itself is already sort of traumatic. But she then, sort of was very, very upset because she sort of, questioned herself, how can I have trusted this gentleman for so long? What happened? Did I invite this? Why had he suddenly done this when all the while he's been my mentor and trusted and all the rest of it? Have I been giving the wrong vibes? So she's wrestling with this dilemma herself. And as she returns to her partner and divulges to her partner that this has happened, he asked her, what were you wearing? Right? What were you wearing that this happened? So now she feels even more guilty. And so, I can see nodding heads, like the women are like, oh my God, that's such a wrong question to ask, right? The interesting thing is that as I knew this story, and I was, flabbergasted, and I relayed it to male friends of mine, who I consider above reproach, absolutely, respectable, all for women's empowerment, respect women. And as I relayed the story, again, the question, what was she wearing that this happened? So even, your most decent-minded gentleman will have this question. So that's what I think, Mapasi, if we could eradicate that sort of misconception that somehow a woman or any victim asks for it when it happens, I think that will be one step closer to eradicating this in the workplace and everywhere.
Wow, powerful. Thank you so much, Michelle. Peng Chu, so you've already given us a really good overview of your thoughts around the need for organizational obligations to be articulated. But I was wondering if we could also perhaps, if in your 1 minute wrap up, if you could also perhaps take a stab at trying to identify that one policy that you feel could be the strongest, the most impactful, and the most change making.
I just have 3 points to say. Number one, harassment and abuse is not a personal or a private matter. It is an organizational obligation. If you want to be an employer, you want to be a governing body, you want to, decide for other people, a workplace or whatever, a workplace, a play place or whatever, a sport arena, then there are obligations. There's no running away from that. And number two, so it's not just private personal, it's an organizational matter. And number two, sexual harassment is not a woman's issue. I face this all the time, when we talk about women in sport. Oh, it's a women in sport thing, just bring all the women together, let them talk about it, and then, we'll see what we need to do. It's a good governance issue. You want to be a good governing body, then this is what you need to do, because with rights, with authority comes responsibility, right? With the freedom for you to decide with your people, it comes with obligations. And number three, in sports, we always say that, you need to involve everyone, whether it's male, female, and of course now in sports, the LGBT community as well. And we have this motto right now in sport: if we work together, together we are strong.
Absolutely. Powerful. Absolutely. It is a question of governance, and together we are strong. Sham, you want to just wrap us all up with some of your thoughts?
Sumitra, let me try this question from Melissa on what policy we should have in place. I think we should have a Gender Equality Act immediately, and that's it, and everything will be fine. Well, at least it's a start. Why I say that is because you see the issues that we have right now, and this is the reality. The corporations, the organizations that we have always been male dominated. The numbers speak for itself. So we've got a lot more men in positions of leadership than we have women, and that needs to change. It is not because of a lack of talent. It is because of lack of recognition. It's because women leave the workforce for multiple reasons. It's because they need to start families. They've got children to take care of, there's no work, there's no proper work-life balance, there's no proper flexible working hour arrangements, etc. And that is the crux of the problem. If we had better laws in terms of gender equality, in terms of policies in place, I think that would be a good start to changing the way organizations are run. The next point I want to make is this. If you're a company, you need to make profits. And so boards, people in positions of power need to understand that sexual harassment is disadvantageous to your profit-making process. You are going to lose money because you are going to lose people. And when you lose people, you're losing talent, you're going to have to retrain, cost goes into those things. So why not retain good talent by creating a safe space for your employees? It's as simple as that. You know, spend a bit of time, understand that this is a long run, it's a long-term game, but there will be benefits at the end of it. And I think organizations, companies, multinational companies multinational companies have no issues because they have the resources to do it. Our focus need to be the SMEs, because the SMEs don't have the resources to put in place these measures. So how can we as volunteer organizations support or assist SMEs with putting in place those policies and, you know, trying to help as best as we can? That's it. Thank you.
Wonderful. I've had such a fun time. It's been an amazing experience learning. I've learned so much from you all, and 5 of you are my new heroes. And I have to say again, thank you so much on behalf of WAO and YSD for your time and your sharing your amazing expertise with us. So I would like to just wrap up our panel by saying, you know, the struggle continues, a luta continua, as they say in Portuguese. And it's really about, you know, all of us coming together and working to make this country better for all of us. There is so much to gain. There is so much work to be done. There's so many gaps, but we have so much drive and knowledge and heart and semangat that can push us forward. I've enjoyed so much listening to all of you. And I think together we can continue our march towards making Malaysia a better country for all of us. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to all our knowledgeable speakers and to Sumitra as our moderator for such an insightful panel discussion. I'm sure all of us learned lots about what we can do to prevent and address sexual harassment in institutional and organizational spaces. As we have come to the end of the event, all of us at WAO and YSD would like to take this opportunity to thank all speakers and participants who have attended today's discussion and making this event a success. Thank you and have a good evening ahead.
Thank you, everyone. Bye. Thank you, wonderful panel.
Thank you, everyone. Don't give up. Stay strong.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.